The morning sun filtered through. The tall glass windows of the bustling cafe on the corner of Ashford and 5th. People lined up in suits, students hunched over laptops, and the rich aroma of roasted beans floated in the air. To most, it was just another coffee shop. To him, however, it was more than that. It was a dream carved out of struggle, a business built with sleepless nights and relentless determination. Derek Lewis, the man standing quietly in line, wasn't just a customer. He was the owner, the CEO who had started this cafe chain from a single borrowed storefront, who had turned pennies into an empire. He didn't walk in with an entourage or announce his name. He simply stood among the customers, ordering coffee like anyone else. Because that was who he was, a man who valued humility as much as success. The cashier, a young clerk with neatly combed hair, didn't recognize him. And that didn't bother Derek. He'd always believed his staff should treat every customer with the same respect, no matter who they were. When it was finally his turn, he stepped forward with a warm smile. "Good morning," Derek said. "I'll have a black coffee, no sugar." The clerk punched the order into the register, his face flat, his tone clipped. Derek reached for his wallet, still smiling, but then he heard it. 3 words. Words not meant for him to hear, whispered to the barista standing beside the clerk. Another broke one. The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. Derek froze. His smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but he quickly composed himself. The barista's eyes darted nervously, as though realizing the mistake. But the clerk chuckled under his breath, dismissive, not caring that Derek had heard. To them, he was just another black man ordering the cheapest item on the menu. Someone not worth respect. They saw the plain clothes, the unassuming demeanor, and made their judgment without hesitation. They didn't see the man who had built the very walls around them. They didn't know he signed their paychecks, that his vision had created their livelihoods. Derek's chest tightened. Not from the insult itself, he had been called worse growing up, but from the bitter sting of disappointment. This was his shop, his brand, a place he had promised would be safe, inclusive, and respectful. And here he was, standing on the other side of the counter, hearing discrimination seep from the very heart of what he had built. He didn't speak right away. Years of leadership had taught him patience. But as he waited for his coffee, memories flooded back, memories of why this cafe existed in the first place. He thought of his mother, who cleaned houses for wealthy families, who was once denied a glass of water on a scorching summer day because she was just the help. He thought of the time he had been told by a bank officer that his business idea was too ambitious for someone like you. He thought of the countless times people had mistaken him for a delivery boy when he first started out, carrying sacks of beans on his back because he couldn't yet afford staff. Every step of his journey had been shadowed by prejudice, but he had never let it stop him. Instead, he had turned every insult, every rejection, every stereotype into fuel. This cafe wasn't just a business. It was his answer to the world that had tried to shrink him. It was proof that dignity, resilience, and brilliance could bloom even in the harshest soil. And now, to hear those words, another broke one, inside his own shop. From the mouths of those who should have carried his vision forward, it cut deep. Derek accepted his coffee with steady hands. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm but laced with an authority that made the barista look up. The clerk didn't notice. He was too busy leaning on the counter, whispering another remark to his coworker, smirking. Derek didn't leave. He stepped aside, sipping his coffee slowly, his eyes watching the flow of customers, the rhythm of his business. Every detail mattered to him, the way the tables were arranged, the hum of conversation, the way the staff moved behind the counter. But today, what mattered most was the lesson unfolding before his eyes, because he knew this moment was bigger than him. It was about every black man or woman who had ever been sized up, dismissed or belittled based on nothing more than appearance. It was about the dignity stolen in whispers, the respect denied in silence. And if he let this slide, if he walked out quietly, then his cafe would be no different from the places his mother had once been denied water in. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a guardian of the values he had promised his community. The barista, sensing the weight in Derek's gaze, fidgeted nervously. The clerk, oblivious, laughed again at something he muttered under his breath. Derek straightened his shoulders. The time for silence was over. He placed the cup gently on the counter and spoke with the calm authority of a man who knew his worth. "I'd like to speak to your manager." The word silenced the smirk instantly. The clerk raised an eyebrow, almost mocking, as if to say, "What, over coffee?" But when the manager stepped out from the back office and saw Derek standing there, everything changed. Her face lit up with shock and respect. "Mr. Lewis," she stammered. I didn't know you were coming today." The clerk's smirk collapsed into confusion. His eyes darted between the manager and Derek, realization dawning too late. Derek didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned, fixing the clerk with a steady gaze. "Perhaps now," he said quietly, "you'll understand why respect is not optional here. Not for anyone." The cafe grew still. Customers leaned in, sensing something important was unfolding. The clerk swallowed hard, his arrogance evaporating in the presence of the man he had underestimated. And for the first time that morning, Derek allowed himself to feel the weight of those 3 words, not as an insult, but as a reminder: the fight for dignity never ends. The cafe had grown strangely quiet, as if every person in line understood they were witnessing more than a dispute over coffee. The hum of conversation, the tapping of laptop keys, the hiss of steaming milk, all of it seemed to pause in the air. The manager, a woman named Teresa, rushed forward, her voice tense but respectful. "Mr. Lewis, I sincerely apologize if there's been a misunderstanding. Please let me—" Derek raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. His tone was calm but edged with gravity. "This isn't about me, Teresa. It's about him. It's about what he just said." The clerk, a young man barely in his 20s, shifted uneasily. His bravado from moments ago had vanished, but his pride wouldn't let him admit fault so easily. I didn't mean anything by it," he muttered, eyes darting toward the customers watching him. "You didn't mean anything by it?" Derek repeated, his gaze steady, voice calm yet commanding. "You called me another broke one, a man you know nothing about. You sized me up, dismissed me, disrespected me, all because of how I looked. That isn't just a slip of the tongue. That's prejudice, and it doesn't belong in my shop." The word "my" landed like thunder. The clerk blinked, his face paling. His mouth opened, then closed, as if struggling to process the reality. "Your shop?" he stammered. Teresa nodded sharply. "This is Mr. Derek Lewis, the founder." The CEO. Gasps rippled through the cafe. A student near the window whispered to her friend, "Wait, he owns this place." Customers who had barely glanced at Derek when he entered now stared at him with new eyes, recognizing the quiet authority he carried. The clerk's mouth fell open. I didn't know." "That's the problem," Derek interrupted, his voice even but firm. "You didn't know who I was, and so you thought it was safe to insult me. But what if I truly had been just another man ordering a coffee? Would that have made your words any less cruel? Would that have made it acceptable to belittle someone you assumed had less than you?" The question sliced through the silence. The barista shifted awkwardly, guilt flashing across her face. She had been complicit too, even if only by silence. Derek took a step closer, his posture calm but unyielding. "Let me tell you something, son. I grew up being called worse than broke. I've been told I'd never amount to anything, that I'd always be at the bottom, scraping by, and maybe once upon a time that was true, but I worked. I fought, I built. And now, this cafe exists not just because I wanted to make money, but because I wanted to create a place where people could walk in, no matter who they are, and be treated with dignity." His words rang with emotion, but his voice never rose above a conversational tone. It was the kind of authority that didn't need shouting to command respect. "You see, when you whispered those 3 words, you didn't just disrespect me," Derek continued, his eyes never leaving the clerk's. "You disrespected every customer who has ever walked through those doors. You disrespected the vision this business was built on, and you disrespected yourself. Because prejudice always reduces the one who carries it." The clerk's hands trembled slightly. He looked around, seeing the faces of customers staring at him, their expressions mixed with judgment and disappointment. The heat of shame burned his cheeks. I'm sorry," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "Sorry isn't enough," Derek replied softly. But his words carried the weight of a gavel. "Apologies are words. What matters is what you do after." Teresa stepped in, her voice firm now. "Mr. Lewis, I'll handle this. This behavior is unacceptable, and it will be addressed immediately." But Derek shook his head. "No, Teresa. This isn't just about punishment. This is about learning, about making sure he and everyone watching understands the cost of careless words." He turned back to the clerk. "Do you know what coffee means to me?" The clerk shook his head nervously. When I was a boy, Derek began, his voice softer now. My mother worked 3 jobs. She couldn't afford luxuries, but once a week, she'd save up just enough to buy herself a small coffee from a shop on her way to work. That cup wasn't about caffeine, it was about dignity. It was about feeling human, even for a moment. When I started this business, I remembered that. I wanted to create a space where no one would ever be looked down on for what they could or couldn't afford. The cafe was silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to wait for him to finish. And you, Derek said, locking eyes with the clerk, you forgot that. Or maybe you never knew it. But today you'll learn. Not because I'm angry, but because this is bigger than you or me. This is about what kind of place this will be. The clerk swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? Derek let the silence stretch for a moment before answering. I want you to stand here right now and serve every customer that walks in today with respect. I don't care if they buy a $5 latte or a $1 cup of black coffee. I want you to look them in the eye. Smile and remember that their money, their dignity, their humanity means something. And after your shift, I want you to sit down with Teresa and the rest of this staff, and I want you to listen. Listen to why this cafe exists. Listen to the values it's built on, and decide if you can honor them. The young man nodded quickly, his pride stripped away, replaced by something raw, humility. Derek turned, addressing not just the clerk but everyone in the cafe. Respect, he said, his voice steady, isn't optional. It's the foundation of everything we do here, and if we can't practice it inside these walls, then we have no right to expect it outside of them. The customers broke into quiet applause, not loud, not performative but heartfelt. It wasn't for a CEO scolding an employee, it was for a man standing up for something that mattered. Derek picked up his cup again, taking a slow sip. The coffee was still hot, bitter but grounding. He didn't need validation from the applause, nor from the stunned expressions around him. He needed only one thing, to know that the values he fought for would not be compromised. Not here, not in his house. And as he stood there, he realized something else. The fight wasn't just about one clerk's careless words. It was about the world outside. These doors, the countless places where people like his mother were still dismissed, disrespected, overlooked. His cafe was just one corner of that world. But maybe, just maybe, it could be a corner where dignity lived. He exhaled slowly, the tension easing from his shoulders. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a lesson his staff and his community needed to hear. By the time Derek stepped into the back office later that afternoon, word of the incident had already spread. Some employees whispered nervously, others stood straighter, unsure of what was coming next. The air carried a mix of tension and expectation, the kind that hangs when everyone knows a reckoning is about to take place. Derek didn't storm in. He walked calmly, setting his half-finished coffee on the desk, his presence commanding without effort. The staff gathered in a semicircle, including the young clerk whose face was still pale from embarrassment. Teresa, the manager, stood nearby, watching him with both respect and concern. He leaned against the edge of the desk, arms folded loosely. I don't call meetings like this often, he began, his voice even, carrying the weight of a leader who didn't need volume to command attention. But today, something happened that requires all of us to reflect. And it started with 3 words. The staff shifted uncomfortably. The clerk kept his eyes low, shame painted across his expression. I heard those words, Derek continued. I won't repeat them here because they don't deserve power. But I need you all to understand why those words mattered. They weren't just about me. They weren't just about one customer. They were about something bigger, the kind of culture we allow to live inside. These walls. He paused, scanning the room, making eye contact with each employee. This cafe was never meant to be just a business. I didn't build it so we could serve drinks and collect money. I built it because I remember what it felt like to be treated as less. I remember walking into places and feeling invisible, or worse, unwanted. I promised myself that if I ever created something of my own, it would never make anyone feel that way. A murmur rippled through the room. A young woman in an apron raised her hand hesitantly. Mr. Lewis, she asked softly, do you really think one comment, one mistake, means we've failed at that? Derek nodded gently. That's a fair question. And the answer is no. One mistake doesn't erase everything we've built. But silence? Complacency? Allowing those words to slip by without accountability? That's what destroys a vision. That's what kills trust. It's not about one mistake, it's about what we choose to do after. The clerk finally lifted his eyes, voice trembling. I wasn't thinking. It was stupid. I thought I was being funny. I didn't mean... Derek held up a hand, stopping him. Son, let me be clear. Prejudice rarely looks like hatred in our times. It often hides behind jokes, behind whispers, behind things people claim they didn't mean. But the person on the receiving end? They feel it. They carry it. And that weight is heavy. So you need to ask yourself, are you here to serve drinks? Or are you here to serve people? Because if you can't respect the people, the drinks don't matter. The young man swallowed hard, nodding slowly, the lesson cutting deeper than any formal reprimand could. Derek turned back to the group. This isn't about shaming one person. It's about raising all of us higher. If we're going to be different, if we're going to stand for something, then we have to live it every single day. That means respect is not negotiable. Not for a single customer. Not for each other. Not for anyone. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, like soil being tilled, ready for new seeds. Derek straightened, his voice softening. I want to share something with you. When we opened our first store, I had just enough money to buy beans, cups, and pay the rent for 1 month. Everything else, tables, chairs, even the paint on the walls I built with my own hands. I didn't have investors. I didn't have banks willing to believe in me. All I had was a vision. And the vision wasn't just coffee. It was dignity. It was a place where people felt welcome. He gestured around the room. Look at what we've built now. We've grown to dozens of locations. People know our name. But growth means nothing if we lose our soul. And today reminded me how easily that can happen if we don't guard it. The barista who had overheard the comment stepped forward, eyes filled with remorse. Mr. Lewis, I should have said something. I heard him and I froze. I didn't want to cause trouble, but I should have spoken up. Derek gave her a small, approving nod. Thank you for admitting that. And let me tell you, silence is also a choice. If you hear something wrong and you don't speak, then that wrong grows roots. But if you challenge it, even in a small way, you stop it from spreading. That's the kind of courage we need here. He let his words sink in before continuing. So from today forward, we're making a change. This isn't just a cafe. This is a place of respect. And that will not be a slogan on a wall, it will be a practice. Every new hire will go through training, not just on how to brew coffee, but on how to treat people. We'll talk about dignity, about bias, about the small ways we can uplift or tear down someone with our words. And if anyone cannot honor that, then they cannot work here. The staff nodded, some with solemn expressions, others with relief. For many, it felt like a burden had been lifted, the burden of pretending. Prejudice didn't exist. Derek looked back at the young clerk, whose eyes now brimmed with shame and something else, resolve. This isn't the end of your story, Derek told him gently. It's the beginning of your choice. You can walk away unchanged, or you can grow. And if you choose to grow, you'll not only be a better employee, you'll be a better man. The clerk nodded, voice breaking. I'll grow, sir. I promise. Derek studied him for a moment, then extended a hand. The clerk blinked in surprise but shook it, his grip tentative. The gesture wasn't an erasure of what happened. It was a bridge toward something better. When the meeting ended, the staff left with more than just instructions. They left with conviction. The cafe didn't feel the same as it had that morning. It felt charged, renewed, as though the very walls had absorbed Derek's words and carried them like scripture. Later that evening, Derek returned to the front of the shop, sitting quietly by the window with his now cold coffee. Customers still buzzed around, unaware of the full conversation that had happened in the back. But Derek knew. He watched the clerk behind the counter, standing straighter, speaking to customers with genuine respect in his voice. The change was small, but it was there, and change always started small.